Among the most extreme aspects of World War I was tunnel warfare, an even more perilous form of trench combat marked by dangers, horrors, and suffering, culminating in the largest non-nuclear explosion in history. Despite its significance, it remains an often overlooked topic, a gap we aim to address today. We will explore the horrific consequences when opposing tunnels unexpectedly met beneath no man's land. The introduction of new quick-firing artillery and machine guns rapidly transformed World War I into a stalemate of trench warfare. The world's most modern armies were unprepared for these weapon advancements. Existing tactics failed, resulting in hundreds of thousands of lives lost before this reality was acknowledged. Trench warfare emerged as armies desperately dug in for protection. Yet this created new challenges. Once the Western Front stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss border, neither side could breach enemy lines. The conflict evolved into two entrenched forces, relentlessly shelling each other and attempting breakthroughs through every conceivable, yet unsuccessful means. Charging across no man's land proved an inadequate strategy. With all conventional tactics exhausted, soldiers resorted to ingenious, albeit desperate methods to outsmart and destroy the enemy. One such method, dating back to ancient siege warfare, involved tunneling. If assaulting an enemy position from above was impossible, the alternative was to dig a tunnel, plant a substantial amount of explosives, and launch a surprise attack from below, without encountering initial opposition. That was the underlying theory. The reality, however, presented significantly more complications. The reality of tunneling, however, proved far more complex. While a conceptually brilliant idea, it swiftly escalated into a horrifying form of warfare, intensifying the existing brutality of the conflict. By 1914, in the early months of trench warfare, German forces initiated the first underground offensive, demonstrating its devastating potential. At Givenchy in Flanders, they secretly excavated tunnels beneath British lines, planting 10 small mines, each containing approximately 50 kilograms of explosives directly under an Indian brigade's trenches. These mines were simultaneously detonated, immediately followed by an infantry assault designed to exploit the resulting shock. The entire sector was overrun within minutes, leading to the decimation of over 800 Indian soldiers in this surprise attack. While not a decisive blow to the war, this engagement significantly alarmed Allied commanders, who recognized a new threat for which they possessed neither a solution nor their own tunneling capabilities. Simultaneously, the French conducted small-scale mining operations in specific locations, but no Allied power had developed an underground strategy comparable to the Germans at this stage. This situation, however, was about to change dramatically. Following the initial German success in using tunnels to overcome trench defenses, all belligerent nations rapidly began developing their own tunneling tactics, initiating an underground war. This subterranean conflict primarily served two purposes: offensive mining, involving the excavation of tunnels to enemy positions for the placement of vast quantities of explosives, and countermining, designed to prevent the adversary from executing similar operations. The inevitable question arose: what happens when enemy tunnels accidentally intersect underground? We will explore that grim scenario later. Recognizing the need to counter enemy miners, British commanders requested specialist units. An immediate idea was to leverage the expertise of the clay kickers, civilian miners renowned for constructing London's underground tunnels. Their specialized knowledge could enable the Allies to form an elite corps of army sappers, potentially breaking the trench deadlock. By 1915, the British Army swiftly established its first 8 tunneling companies within the Royal Engineers. These units comprised regular soldiers, newly enlisted coal miners, sewer diggers, and anyone with experience in excavation, driven either by unwavering courage or a limited understanding of the dangers they volunteered for. The demand was so urgent that some men were directly deployed from British coal mines to the front lines within days. The British tunneling force rapidly expanded to over 30 companies, with 21,000 tunnelers working on projects beneath the Western Front. Canada formed 3 such companies, with Australian and New Zealand units joining later at the peak of tunnel warfare. The French also developed their own sapper units, while German and Austro-Hungarian armies closely followed suit. The stage was now set to transfer combat underground, introducing a distinct form of horror unique in military history. Shortly after forming these units, the British conducted their first large-scale test. Royal Engineers planted a series of 6 massive mines beneath the German-held Hill 60 near Ypres, a heavily fortified position impenetrable from the surface. Upon detonation in unison, followed by an immediate infantry charge, Hill 60 and its unfortunate German defenders were effectively obliterated. British infantry swiftly seized the cratered remains, although they later lost the position in a counterattack. The sheer effectiveness of these mines in neutralizing previously impregnable positions spurred every nation to intensify their tunneling efforts. And throughout 1915, underground warfare escalated across the Western Front. While initially lagging behind the Germans in this subterranean contest, the British quickly caught up and surpassed German tunneling techniques. The British employed the clay-kicking method, a technique unfamiliar to the Germans. This method proved highly effective in clay-rich regions like Flanders, where the majority of tunnel warfare occurred. British tunnelers would dig deeper than their German counterparts, starting with a vertical shaft. Steel cylinders were jacked down through soft, quicksandy ground until they reached a stable layer of blue clay at approximately 30 meters, which was significantly easier and safer to excavate. From there, they would tunnel horizontally towards enemy lines, maintaining a slight upward angle to ensure water drained back, keeping the digging point dry. This method, however, introduced the risk of gas accumulation in the tunnels, a danger we will further address when detailing tunnel conditions. The clay-kicking technique offered several key advantages. A three-man team operated together. The kicker sat with his back against a wooden excavating clay by thrusting a spade-like tool with his feet. The bagger collected the clay and filled bags, and the trammer transported the filled bags out of the mine while bringing back support timber. This method facilitated silent digging, as it avoided the percussive noise of German pickaxes, and clay transmitted sound less effectively than other soil types, making detection far more challenging. It was also considerably faster, with clay kickers averaging 8 meters per day compared to the Germans' 2. The British further enhanced tunnel stability using special wooden support timbers, placed every 9 inches. This system was ingeniously designed for silent assembly, unlike the German method, as it required no nails or screws that could betray their position. Instead, the pre-cut timbers simply interlocked like modular pieces, with moisture causing the wood to swell and secure them in place without hammering. Every operational detail was critical for survival, including the disposal of excavated earth. While sandbags filled with spoil could reinforce surface trenches, this presented a risk. If enemy forces observed blue clay in damaged sandbags, they would immediately deduce a nearby mining operation, intensifying their efforts against it. Sections suspected of mining activity often endured heavier shelling and even raids to locate the tunnels, leading to ground units' strong dislike for the presence of mining operations nearby. Before examining the consequences of two opposing sides meeting underground, let us first describe the conditions within these tunnels. To truly grasp the horror, one must first understand the subterranean atmosphere. Working in these tunnels was anything but safe or comfortable, explaining why tunnelers earned 6 times more than a frontline private. The job description included the constant threat of being buried alive, drowned, or asphyxiated, compounded by extreme claustrophobia and unwelcome vermin. Tunnels typically measured about 4 feet high by 2.5 feet wide, providing barely enough space for a man to work crouched. Shifts lasted between 6 and 12 hours, under catastrophic conditions, wet, cold, dark, and cramped, with persistent risks of cave-ins, gas poisoning, enemy countermining operations, or striking an underground water line that could inundate a tunnel in seconds. Veterans described the foul air and humidity in such confined spaces as being trapped in a sweating coffin. Men relied on candles or oil lamps for light, carefully observing the flame for indications of oxygen depletion. Gas posed a continuous threat, lingering from constant surface shelling and explosions, or worse, from gas attacks. Chlorine and phosgene, being heavier than air, could sink into shafts and accumulate in the tunnels, necessitating air-sealed entrances. The tunnelers often utilized small animals, such as mice or canaries, as living gas detectors. Their early signs of poisoning would warn men to evacuate immediately. An additional danger was the tunnel entrance being struck by artillery or captured by the enemy on the surface. For instance, French artillery once hit the German Winterberg tunnel entrance, causing it to collapse and entomb over 250 men, only a handful of whom miraculously escaped in the following days. The rest remained buried beneath the ground. Raids to capture tunnel entrances and cripple enemy mining operations were also common, a tactic the Germans frequently employed against the British with occasional success. Tunnelers would emerge only to discover their entrance was in enemy hands, or worse, had been collapsed with explosives, trapping them underground. Encounters between enemy tunnels underground, though rare, were not impossible, given the miles of tunnels dug in specific front sections. Such intersections occurred both intentionally and by chance. The tunnels were too small and narrow for effective combat with rifles or standard weapons. Consequently, tunnelers resorted to their digging tools or specialized close-quarters weapons like sawed-off rifles, revolvers, or knives, engaging in savage melee combat within a few cubic feet of subterranean darkness. Imagine the earth suddenly collapsing, revealing an enemy tunnel. Whether empty or occupied, this immediate exposure could lead to a desperate hand-to-hand struggle against an enemy tunneler in a cramped, pitch-black environment. This experience, a fight for survival in already terrifying conditions, defies adequate verbal description, revealing a grim extreme of human conflict. Upon discovering an enemy tunnel, tunnelers would typically inspect it, sometimes even reaching the enemy trench entrance if the tunnel had been abandoned. The devastating effectiveness of mining missions instilled terror in frontline soldiers, leading to desperate attempts to detect approaching tunnels. Initially, improvised listening devices were used, such as oil drums filled with water to observe vibrations, or sticks bitten for ground-transmitted sensations. This soon evolved with the introduction of stethoscopes, and eventually geophones, capable of detecting subterranean noises up to 60 feet away. Dedicated listeners continuously manned these devices to determine direction and guide counter-operations. These involve digging a tunnel underneath to place an explosive charge, known as a camouflage, either to collapse the enemy tunnel or to detonate it ahead, rendering the ground unstable for further digging. Such an interception could also be directed at one's own tunneling operation, if detected and intercepted by the enemy. However, successful detection of enemy tunnels was not always timely, as diggers were meticulous in minimizing noise. Listeners often reported that the most unnerving experience was not hearing enemy tunnels being dug for days, but the sudden silence that followed. This silence often signified that a mine had been successfully planted and the enemy had retreated, awaiting the opportune moment for detonation. Regarding detonation, let us examine its methods and practical application. Prior to the colossal mines that would later become the largest non-nuclear explosions in history, smaller charges were used. Initially, both sides employed gunpowder, but its explosive characteristics yielded unimpressive results. The British then adopted ammonol, which proved far more effective due to its significant lifting power. Composed of approximately 70% ammonium nitrate, 20% TNT, and 10% aluminum powder, ammonol produced a massive volume of gas and heat, capable of throwing thousands of tons of earth into the air and creating huge craters. It was also inexpensive to produce in large quantities and more stable than pure TNT. Its main drawback was moisture absorption, necessitating careful bagging in waterproof sacks. Detonation was achieved using electric detonators with wires extending to a safe distance. For instance, during the Battle of Messines Ridge, several mines, each containing a few hundred pounds of explosives, were detonated at 0 hour in coordination with infantry units to disrupt enemy defenses. These explosions obliterated obstacles and key enemy positions, leaving behind vast craters. Infantry would then sprint to capture and defend these craters in savage engagements. As tunnelers refined their techniques, the scale of underground networks and mine charges grew continuously. By 1916, subterranean warfare reached new extremes of scale and ferocity. Tunnelers on both sides were now literally fighting a war beneath the surface. The Battle of the Somme would mark a turning point. The turning point in underground warfare arrived with the Battle of the Somme. British Royal Engineer tunneling companies toiled for months, underground in complete secrecy. On July 1, 1916, at 7:28 a.m., 2 minutes prior to the planned infantry assault, they detonated 8 large and 11 smaller mines beneath German positions, deploying tens of thousands of pounds of explosives. The immense blast ripped open the earth, creating craters up to 65 feet deep and over 300 feet across. German strongholds and their defenders were hurled into the air. British troops then charged forward to secure the crater rims. While the Somme demonstrated the immense potential of these massive mines, it also highlighted the necessity for improved coordination with infantry to fully exploit the ensuing chaos. These explosions were, at the time, the largest human-made blasts in history, yet they were soon surpassed the following year at Messines, where tunneling operations would achieve their ultimate destructive capability. The pinnacle of World War I tunnel warfare occurred in June 1917 at the Battle of Messines Ridge. This position consisted of heavily defended German lines, firmly held since 1914. For the planned offensive to succeed, this strategic position had to be neutralized. However, the terrain strongly favored the Germans, and numerous costly and failed attempts revealed the formidable challenge of capturing it. Consequently, after 18 months of clandestine preparation, 21 enormous mines were planted by British and Commonwealth tunneling units beneath these seemingly impregnable German defenses. 26 mines had been prepared, but some were abandoned after German countermining efforts flooded them. Individual tunnels extended for nearly 800 yards, and the combined length of tunnels excavated for this operation exceeded 3 miles. All this was executed in absolute silence, carefully avoiding German counter-sappers and navigating perilous ground prone to water pockets. Although new German mining operations were underway, Allied tunnels had reached deep clay layers, making them significantly harder to detect. Decoy tunnels were even excavated to mislead the Germans and conceal the true, deeper tunnels. Across the front line, the entire mine belt contained approximately 450 tons of explosives, all ready for detonation. On June 7, 1917, at 3:10 a.m., within roughly 20 seconds, 19 mines erupted along a line stretching nearly 6 miles. The entire ridge was lifted hundreds of feet into the air before crashing back down. As the dust slowly settled, the enormous craters revealed the remnants of the once impregnable German defenses. Thousands of defenders had vanished, either obliterated from the surface or interred deep beneath it. Estimates suggest between 7,000 and 10,000 German soldiers were killed in the detonations alone, many having sought refuge in deep dugouts that had previously protected them from artillery bombardment. Yet nothing could withstand this colossal series of explosions that profoundly altered the local geography. Infantry divisions then advanced across the devastated landscape, encountering minimal opposition. Disoriented survivors either surrendered or were overrun by Allied troops advancing under a creeping barrage. The operation's success stemmed from the close cooperation between ground and underground units, coupled with precise artillery coordination to exploit the breaches created by the mines and rectify shortcomings observed earlier at the Somme. Not all mines were detonated. One famous example exploded decades later in 1955 when a lightning strike triggered the charge in a Belgian field, killing a cow. Several more large mines remain underground to this day, perhaps awaiting the unforeseen spark that could unleash their power. The Messines craters endure, visible to visitors in Belgium,